Hello, and welcome back to our extended 10-part series on how to improve our democracy. My name is Josh Landers. I'm a communications studies student here at San Jose State, and I have been supervised by Scott Lasco, the coach of the forensics team here at San Jose State, on this project. And this project is all about improving our democracy. So we're asked to explore different solutions, things we would like to expand, things we would like to get rid of in order to create a better democracy. So without further ado, I would like to get into this portion of the presentation on improving our democracy, and that solution is reparations for Black and Indigenous people of color. So before we could get into the reparations discussion, I would first like to define terms about democracy. Before we could improve a democracy, we first have to know what one is, right? So democracy comes from the Greek word demos, meaning people. In democracies, it is the people who hold sovereign power over legislature and government. Although nuances apply to the world's various democracies, certain principles and practices distinguish democratic governments from other forms of government. Democracy is government in which power and civic responsibility are exercised by all citizens, directly or through their freely elected representatives. So when it says directly or through representatives, I think that's an important place to pause and do some explaining. So back in the original democracies, the origins, back in Greece, it was one vote, one man, one vote. So it was a direct democracy. All the men in the town would come out, and there would be an issue that they were voting on, and it was just majority rule. But in larger nations like America, where there's almost 400 million of us, that would be very, the logistics would be tough, right? So in order to make things simpler and more effective, how we use our civic engagement is that we elect officials to represent us in the decision-making process. So, for example, on the city council, we would vote for whoever would represent our views the most, and then city council will have votes about what, how they should proceed on certain issues. So America is a representative democracy. Democracy is a set of principles and practices that protect human freedom. It is the institutionalization of freedom. Democracy rests upon the principles of majority rule, coupled with individual and minority rights. All democracies, while respecting the will of majority, zealously protect the fundamental rights of individual and minority groups. Democracies guard against all-powerful central governments and decentralize government to regional and local levels, as we were talking about, understanding that local government must be as accessible and responsive to the people as possible. So if it was just relying on one central government from Washington, D.C. to solve our local issues in San Jose, they wouldn't be very responsive or accessible. So yeah. Democracies understand that their prime function is to protect such basic human rights as freedom of speech and religion, the right to equal protection under the law, and the opportunity to organize and participate in political, economical, and cultural life of society. I hope this was helpful. I hope we're starting to get on the same page of what makes a democracy, what's the purpose of democracy, how democracy works. So as we move forward, I had a video that I wanted to show you about Ta-Nehisi Coates. I hope I didn't mispronounce that. She made the case for slavery reparations. This is featured in Oprah's book club on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Due to time restrictions, we're not going to be able to watch the video today, but essentially the points that she is making is that there can be a direct correlation drawn between the effects of American slavery and people struggling today and descendants of slaves today. Therefore, reparations are in order. But before we could talk about whether they're in order, what they would do to improve our democracy, why I think that they are imperative, we first have to ask ourselves, what are reparations? Reparations are a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. Those groups, so just to clarify here, so it's about a healing process. It's about restoring, repairing, wrong that has done, making people whole again. Those groups that have been injured have the right to obtain from the government, corporation, institution, or family responsible for the injuries that which they need to repair and heal themselves. In addition to being a demand for justice, it is a principle of international human rights law. Examples of groups that have obtained reparations include Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust, Japanese Americans interned into concentration camps in the United States during World War II, and Alaska natives for land, labor, and resources taken, and more. So there is a strong precedent for reparations being given, and that's why I don't think my advocacy for reparations given to indigenous and black people in this country is too much to ask for. And this is why. This is why I believe black and indigenous people of color deserve reparations. For the harm they sustained due to slavery and subsequent discrimination. Coates argues, from the video I mentioned before, it's necessary for three reasons. One, the loss of free will and destruction of families. Two, the wealth stolen by white people from African Americans. And three, a kind of spiritual closure for all Americans, what the author calls America's maturation out of the childhood myth of innocence, Part X. Of, of the three, the essay focuses most on the stolen wealth of African Americans. And that's the part that's undeniable, right? Please excuse that interruption and let me get back to what I was saying about the plundering of wealth and why people are deserving of reparations. Uh, African descendants continue to be denied rights of self-determination, inheritance, and full participation in the United States government and society. As we continue, millions of Africans were brutalized, murdered, raped, and tortured. They were torn from their families in Africa, kidnapped, and lost family community associations. This is human trafficking that the USA government had a part in. African peoples in the United States and prior to the colonies were denied the right to maintain their language, spiritual practices, and normal family is at the whim of slave owner. It was followed by 100 years of government-led and supported denial of equal and humane treatment, including black codes, convict lease system, sharecropping, peonage, Jim Crow practices of separate and unequal accommodations. So again, if the destruction of family and the brutalization and the harm caused is not enough for you to feel like reparations are deserved, I think that the plundering of wealth and the profiteering that was happening off of this exploitation, that's the strongest reason why the money is deserved, why the reparations are necessary. So let's ask ourselves, what would reparations look like? The material forms of reparations include cash payment, land, economic development, and reparation resources, particularly to those who are descendants of enslaved Africans. Other forms of reparations for Black people of African descent include funds for scholarships and community development, creation of multimedia depictions of the history of Black people of African descent, and textbooks for educational institutions that tell the story of tell the story of people of African descent's perspective. I think it's very important for us to imagine what reparations look like, but I also do believe that it starts just by advocating that they are necessary. So as we continue, develop other ways that reparations could be given as the development of historical monuments and museums, the return of artifacts in art, to appropriate people or institutions, exonerations of political prisoners, and the elimination of laws and practices that maintain dual systems in major areas of life, including punishment system, health, education, and the financial and economic system. The forms of reparations received should improve the lives of African descendants in the United States for future generations to come. It should foster economic, social, and political parity and allow for full rights of self-determination. And now I think this is the part that is essential for our presentation is how reparations will improve our democracy. Um, have you ever heard the quotation, a threat to justice and freedom anywhere is a threat to justice and freedom everywhere? So, beginning to repair the damage done makes us all more free, right? Living in a nation where this can happen without repair, um, opens the door for it to happen to us as well. So reparation could allow for some closure on a disgusting history, and acknowledgement of the United States' responsibility for slavery and the subsequent discrimination and violence would improve a national pride, making our democracy more whole. It would make our democracy more whole, more just, more free for everyone in it. And that's a major improvement. Citizens will be more civically engaged with a country that attempts to act in a moral and principled manner. So I think at the core of Americans' distrust in the political process comes from um, the lack of moral authority that America holds because of its profit and its participation in this human trafficking without reparation. So um, there it is. We'll conclude with a quick quiz question. What is reparations? A surgical process to repair damaged limbs. A process of repairing. B, a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity. C, a charity. D, something that only benefits Black or Indigenous people of color. And the answer is B, something that benefits us all. It's a process of repairing and healing and restoring a people injured because of their group identity. A lot of people like to say we're past it, but until we repair it, we will never be able to be past it. Thank you so much for your time. I'll see you at the next episode.